Okay, so as you probably know, I've said it before, these videos, we tape them the day before. Today's video was taped yesterday. Yesterday's video was taped on Tuesday. Tomorrow's video I'm going to tape later today. It's what we do. I mean, I can't wake up. Well, I mean, can, and I do usually wake up pretty early, but I'm not going to wake up at 5 a.m. and record that day's video. I usually wait, I wait till mid-afternoon, late afternoon, sometimes into the evening, depending on the day and what's going on. So today's video was recorded yesterday. And as you can see by the headline, it's about Heather Lyke and her apparent candidacy for the Northwestern athletic director job. We've since learned, in the time since I recorded that video, that Villanova athletic director Mark Jackson's going to get the job at Northwestern, which means Heather Lyke's not getting that job. Now, as you can see, this is a rather lengthy video, and it was long even before this extra little part, because this part that I'm recording right now, I recorded after the whole video was already sort of in the can, as they say in the industry. So I'm adding this extra little addendum here at the beginning, a bit of a disclaimer, because there are points in this video where I talk about if she gets a Northwestern job, why she's a candidate for the Northwestern job, this and that. But the bulk of the video is not really about that. The bulk of the video, and I think some of the main points of the video and some of the main things we talk about on this video, I think are still very relevant, and I think are still very important, and I think are a part of the conversation about the overall state of things with the athletic department. I stand by what I say in this video. I stand by the things I've written on Panther-Lair.com the last couple of days. I think those things are all very accurate, and I think they're important talking points and part of the discussion when it comes to Heather Lyke, her legacy at Pitt, her tenure at Pitt, and what she's accomplished and where maybe she needs to have accomplished more. I think those things are all worth talking about and all worth considering. It seems likely that she'll get a contract extension. It's kind of where this whole thing started, is she wanted a contract extension of a certain length. Pitt wanted to give her a contract extension of a shorter length. And that's really the crux of what this whole thing is about, is why Pitt wanted to give Heather Lyke less of a contract extension than she was initially looking for, which I think is probably what's going to end up being the case. I don't know what the narrative will be about Heather Lyke and why she didn't get the Northwestern job, but I think probably the reality is I think she was passed over and will ultimately agree to the deal that Pitt had offered her in the first place. So that's, I think kind of where things are, and it's why we're going to keep the video as is. I'm not going to re-record the whole video. I'm just adding this little part on to say at the top, she's not getting the Northwestern job. Somebody else is, but most of these other things we're talking about here are relevant. So keep that in mind as we move through, and thanks for rolling with it as we go. I debated about when to do this episode, debated about how to do this episode, debated about whether to do this episode, and went back and forth about this or that. But the reality is, right now, the topics of Heather Lyke, the Northwestern AD job, Pitt's athletic department, Pitt Chancellor Joan Gable, the entirety of college sports, the director of athletics position at Pitt, all of these things are intertwined, and all of these things are incredibly relevant and pressing right now. Like, to the point where I'm recording this episode, midday on Wednesday, because we have the live show, we had the live show on Wednesday night, so couldn't really wait until to do it then. But there's a non-zero chance that by the time this is released on Thursday, there might be news on this front. And if you're unaware, the news, the latest developments is that Heather Lyke is involved with the Northwestern AD search, seemingly a finalist, interviewing this week, potentially with a decision to come, who knows, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. And the decision could come today and not get announced publicly until tomorrow, or get reported by Pete Thamel or somebody like that. And so it's pressing, and it's relevant, and it's important. And I think it's an important conversation to have. We've been having it on the message boards for a couple of days now, a really long thread on the message board about not just Heather Lyke potentially going to Northwestern, but about Pitt athletics overall and what the state is of the athletic department at a point in time where the entirety of college athletics is to some extent up in the air. And you don't really know what the landscape is going to look like one day to the next because it feels like it's changing that abruptly. And while it's not quite day to day in terms of changes, I think if you look at the last 3 years of college athletics compared to the previous 50, I would say it's rather seismic and rather abrupt as things are changing. And here Pitt finds itself right in the center of it all. In the ACC, a conference that is regularly targeted as one that could be on the chopping block, potentially looking for a new athletic director. There's a lot to dig into here. There's a lot to talk about. And today's the day we're going to do it. So let's have a conversation about Pitt athletics, Pitt's director of athletics, and just generally the state of things on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I was like, we're going to have to talk about this at some point. We're going to have a conversation about this. We're going to have to get into the topic on one of these Morning Pitt episodes. But Friday's the mailbag, so we couldn't wait and do it then. Monday, we're going to be talking about the game, the Pitt-Kent State game, because, oh yeah, by the way, there's still football being played this week, which is sweet and will be a sweet relief from the rest of this stuff, although I don't think it'll be far from anyone's mind. But on Monday, we're going to be talking about the game. Tuesday, we'll probably be talking about quarterbacks one way or the other. Regardless of what Pat Narduzzi says at his Monday press conference, we're going to be having a conversation about quarterbacks, I suspect, on the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt. And so, I wasn't going to put this conversation off until Wednesday. I wasn't going to wait until Wednesday to talk about the most pressing issue in Pitt athletics right now. So, well, today's the day. Today's the day that we need to talk about it. Of course, the deal. What we always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is our YouTube channel where we have all of our Pitt video content. We have these daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live stream like we did last night, our post-game shows, which I am very much looking forward to on Saturday after the game. We'll be live right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to break down Pitt-Kent State and drink and talk football. That'll be a lot of fun. We have video interviews and press conferences and all those different things that we always do every day right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And the way to be sure you don't miss any of it is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There it is. Subscribe button's right down there. And then, of course, don't forget about the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards where, quite frankly, a whole lot of the conversation that we're about to have right here for the next 15 minutes it has been happening on the message boards for the last 2 days. A lot of you on the message boards might watch this video and listen to the podcast and be like, I've been hearing you say these things for the last 48 hours, dude. Find some new material. But the reality is, everybody on the message boards has been reading this stuff. We can have this conversation in more of an open venue, I think, more with the public. So we're going to do that here on the Morning Pitt. But anyway, if you want to be up on everything that's going on in Pitt athletics, basketball, football, recruiting, general administration, and all those different things, the place to do it is at Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right. So, Heather Lyke. Potentially, maybe likely, probably going to Northwestern to become the athletic director there. This, her latest dalliance with other schools. We know Ohio State. She was in the mix for the Ohio State job. I think maybe Michigan State. I think some West Coast schools, maybe UCLA or USC, maybe both. She has certainly been mentioned in connection with a number of jobs over the past 5 years. And, understandably so. I think there are a lot of reasons why Heather Lyke would appear to be an attractive athletic director candidate. I think when you look at the resume and you look at the bullet points, they are all very positive. You see the national accolades that have been built, over the years, the recognition that she has gotten. And I'll say, we're going to look at the good and the bad, the up and the down of the Heather Lyke era in Pitt athletics, but there's no question that there's been some pretty high achievements in terms of on-field, on-court results since Heather Lyke got to Pitt in 2017, I think it was. The volleyball program, it's the most successful program at Pitt. and that has happened on her watch. The women, both soccer programs, the men's soccer and women's soccer programs have been ascending in recent years. Both, looking like programs on the rise, and that's happened on her watch. Pitt football won an ACC championship on her watch. Pitt men's basketball has finally hit a resurgence for the first time in 10 years over the last 2 seasons. Again, that happened on her watch. There have been considerable facilities upgrades, and that's undeniable. That's tangible. I mean, you could look around Pitt's athletic facilities, whether in the South Side with the football program or everything that's happening up on top of the hill in Oakland, and it's impressive. There's a giant hole with massive construction happening next door to the Peterson Event Center, and that's all been her project. She has been the driving force behind that. She has led the charge for the Victory Heights project to improve the facilities for a number of Pitt's Olympic sports programs. Much needed upgrades for programs whose facilities had fallen into pretty considerable disrepair over the years. These were things that needed to be done, and she's gotten a lot of them done. And I think when you look at the successes, like the actual results of the sports, in addition to kind of how she has led the athletic department in terms of the facilities upgrades and the resources that have been put into the sports, and her position within the ACC, and kind of some of the leadership spots she's found herself in college athletics in general nationally. I mean, you can understand why she has become rather prominent and well known. And she shows up on lists of the top athletic directors in the country. And that's become something of a regular occurrence. I think all of that has sort of led to a general feeling among the Pitt fan base that she's done a really, really good job. And there's no denying those accolades that I just laid out there. I don't think there's any question about that. And so it's curious that we're in this situation that we're in right now, because a lot of this situation of Heather Lyke looking at Northwestern or considering Northwestern seems to be driven by something of an impasse between Heather Lyke and Pitt's, so-called lower campus administration. And there is, this is sort of inside baseball shorthand of lower campus and upper campus, otherwise referred to as the Cathedral and the Peterson Events Center. And you understand that, I mean, they're not different operating bodies, but they are different operating bodies, even if they work, one very much is under the other, and they all sort of work toward ostensibly the same goal, which is the betterment of Pitt. But you have the university administration led by the chancellor, and you have the athletic department led by the athletic director, or in this case, the director of athletics. And so there seems to be, best way to say it is probably that they're not entirely in alignment between lower campus and upper campus, that they don't always see eye to eye, that the same vision is not shared. And largely this dates back to when Joan Gable became the chancellor last summer. It's been about a year since Gable replaced Patrick Gallagher, Gallagher being the chancellor who hired Heather Lyke. And you always end up with, I think, some interesting and unique dynamics when you replace the boss, right? When you get a new boss, it creates interesting dynamics. I mean, you could go back to some of the athletic director, musical chairs that's been played of Pat Narduzzi being hired when Randy Jewell was the interim AD and Patrick Gallagher, the chancellor, largely led the charge. And then Scott Barnes comes in, was hired after Pat Narduzzi was hired. And then, of course, Barnes leaves after a couple years, and Heather Lyke is hired. And so Pat Narduzzi getting new athletic directors, it creates an interesting dynamic. And I think that's the case with Heather Lyke and Joan Gable. And, as far as we can tell, there's a bit of a difference of opinion about what kind of contract extension Heather Lyke should get. And there are different feelings on either side of the aisle there. Again, that lower campus, upper campus separation. And I don't mean to paint it entirely as that it's viewed as an us versus them from either side. I think there's very much a feeling on all sides that there's one us. It's just within that us, you have, again, differing opinions and maybe differing visions. So why with all the accolades and with all the success and with all the achievements and accomplishments, why would there be hesitation on the part of lower campus, on the part of Joan Gable, on the part of the chancellor, the university administration? Why would there be a hesitation or reluctance to agree to a longer deal with Heather Lyke, or, yeah, that's probably the best way to say it. Why would there be that reluctance? Well, I think there's a few things to look at. Heather Lyke's been the athletic director, the director of athletics at Pitt, for about 7 years now. In that time, she's made roughly a dozen head coaching hires, give or depending on how you count some of the different sports, something like cross country or swimming and diving. I mean, you're right around 12 hires. 2 of those hires have been repeat hires, because she hired Lance White for the women's basketball program. It was one of her early hires. She had a lot of early hires. She made a lot of moves in her first year and a half or so, most prominently replacing Kevin Stallings with Jeff Capel, but baseball, softball, women's basketball as well. She made a gymnastics hire pretty early on with Samantha Snyder. She has since replaced Lance White and Samantha Snyder, hired a new women's basketball coach and a new gymnastics coach. So kind of getting a do-over there, which is fine. Not every head coach works out, and you sometimes find yourself in a position to need to make a change. But there's a lot of hires over the course of about 7 years. And when you look at this roughly dozen or so hires that Heather Lyke has made, and you start counting like which ones have been genuinely successful, which ones have really achieved at a high level. Because when you talk about some of the most prominent programs at Pitt, when we listed those accomplishments, the great success of volleyball, well, that's Dan Fisher. Pretty sure he was a Steve Peterson hire. When you talk about the men's soccer program success, that was Jay Vidovich. I think he was an interim AD hire. I think he was Randy Jewell. You talk about, obviously, the ACC championship was Pat Narduzzi. He was a Randy Jewell, Patrick Gallagher hire. When you look at Heather Lyke's most successful hires to this point, you have Randy Waldron with the women's soccer program, which absolutely, that is a smashing success. I think, you could look at men's basketball for how Jeff Capel has panned out in the last 2 years. And you could probably look at wrestling for the success that Keith Gavin has had. I feel like that program probably still has a ceiling it couldn't reach. But I think they've had as much success as anybody in the department, save for maybe volleyball. It's been a pretty successful program, largely on the individual level, but it's been a pretty successful program. That's kind of it for the successful hires. I mean, you could say that, well, baseball is a little more stabilized under Mike Bell than it was under Joe Giordano, I guess. But and baseball has, I think, gotten closer to sort of a relevant position in the ACC, but it's not entirely there yet, and it hasn't really been able to sustain any of the sort of flashes of success that they've achieved. Otherwise, of her hires, you don't really see a lot that jumps out. And even those programs I talked about, I mean, women's soccer, I think undeniably Randy Waldron done a great job, but you talk about men's basketball with Jeff Capel, the last 2 years have been really good. I'm on board that. I'm on that hype train as much as anybody, believe me, and I'm driving it. But the reality is, and I think we all understood this at the time, after year 4, it was largely a buyout that kept Jeff Capel at Pitt, rather than patience or foresight or the vision to see what Capel was building. I think if the buyout was less, if the years left on the contract were lower, I don't think Jeff Capel gets to year 5. And I don't think this shouldn't be like a holy cow, really. I think we all understood that at the time, right? I mean, I think, and if you read Panther-Lair.com, and we said that multiple times, we're like, he's not getting fired because it's just not a good use of money to buy out all of those years, And so, yes, men's basketball has succeeded in the last 2 seasons. But given the option, those 2 seasons probably would not have happened. So you take that with that understanding. And while Keith Gavin has done a good job, I think, with the wrestling program, I think it's a very solid, stable very solid, stable program. I think Keith Gavin has done a good job with it. there was, if you recall, and this was one of her early hires, there was a little bit of controversy around that hire because it was felt that Pat Santoro, the former Pitt wrestler, the standout, 4-time All-American, 2-time national champion at Pitt, who had years of head coaching experience, was pretty much lined up for that job. And somewhere along the way, things got all scrambled. And I don't want to say they ended up with Keith Gavin. Obviously, Gavin himself, a very accomplished Pitt wrestler, and as I say, someone who I think has done a really good job leading the program. But it's the path of how you got there that sort of says, well, in a vacuum, the last 2 years of Pitt men's basketball and the years of Pitt wrestling under Keith Gavin have been good. But I don't think you can entirely look at it in a vacuum when you're considering the entirety of the director of athletics accolades and resume bullet points. Because on the resume, it will say, Jeff Capel's success. It'll say the wrestling success. It'll say the ACC championship. It'll say the volleyball program. It'll say what the soccer programs have done. It'll claim all of these things. But I think you need that context, right? I think you need to understand that context. And I think it's important to include it. And then you move on to more of sort of the administrative side of things, of how this has all operated and where the athletic department is, where they've been, and where they've gotten under Heather Lyke's leadership. And one reality that is undeniable, I've had enough people who know about these kinds of things tell me it. I think maybe it might even be admitted by some of the athletic department leadership who operated in this way. But the reality is, Pitt has been chronically slow to adapt to the new era of college sports. I think there was a point 3 years ago where NIL was very clearly a very big part of college sports and wasn't going away and was only going to get bigger, and the support of the fans was only going to become more and more crucial. And at that point, forward-thinking athletic departments, visionary, athletic departments with vision, athletic departments who understood that, like, we can wish this away, but it's not going to go away. We can say we hate it, we can say we don't like it, but it's not going to go away. And so, like, I've said a lot of times that, like, I think what it comes down to for fans is you just, because this is what the system is, you have to hold your nose and participate if you want your school to be competitive. Well, that applies to administration as well. It applies to administrators at the top of athletic departments. And the ones who bought in, the ones who embraced it, the ones who said, yes, we are going to do everything we possibly can, up to and including the very precise letter of the law, we are going to dive headlong into this, are the ones that have been able to be successful. Because even the schools with massive fan bases and incredible fan mobilization out by third-party groups, I mean, SEC schools that have been able to mobilize their fans through their collectives and whatnot, have still had the support and the backing of the athletic departments at their schools. I tell this story often. I think last year, it might have been 2 years ago. It was either last year or the year before. Ole Miss, for like the month of September, I want to say, said we are pausing all donations to the Ole Miss athletic department. We will not accept donations. Anything you are planning to donate to us, send it to the collective. Now, Pitt may or may not have been able to do something like that, given the state laws in Pennsylvania. But that's that's an example of an athletic department throwing its support behind the collective, behind the NIL efforts, because it understood that's what needs to happen in order to be successful. Pitt has not done that up until somewhere in the last 6 months or so. Slowly, feet dragging, Pitt has moved into this era. Pitt has embraced and supported the NIL era and what it means for University of Pittsburgh athletics. Slowly but surely. And while there was all that dragging of feet, which is really what it was, other schools were getting ahead. Other schools were mobilizing. Other schools were putting an organization together. And Pitt wasn't. And so Pitt ends up behind. And when you look at why, Pitt Probably trails a lot of other ACC schools in NIL donations and the NIL war chest and the NIL budget, which are all very real things. It's not 100% of the reason. I'm not going to say that the athletic department's reticence to and reluctance to get involved is 100% of the reason, but it's a big percentage, and it's got a whole lot to do with it. There were very few points in the early years of NIL where Pitt's athletic department was acting to assist Alliance 412. And this is, I mean, I think you can ask a lot of people in a lot of places, and you're going to get this same kind of response. And to some extent, some of it is about background. Heather Lyke, you look at her resume, where's she from? I don't mean Michigan or Ohio State or something like that. Her background is in compliance. And she spent a long time there. She was in enforcement with the NCAA. And a lot of her time prior to becoming the athletic director at Eastern Michigan was spent in compliance. And I think a lot of the people she has surrounded herself with have compliance backgrounds. And I think if that's where you come from, if that's where you've spent decades working in college athletics and compliance, it's really hard to stomach that this is what happens now. But this is what happens now. And whether you like it or not, or whether you can stomach it or not, you need to get on board. But I shouldn't use present tense. You need to get on board. You needed to get on board a long time ago. And this, I think, is one of the major holes on Heather Lyke's resume. A lot of great bullet points, a lot of things to be excited about, but some misses. And I think NIL is one of the misses. I also have genuine concerns, real concerns about where this athletic department stands in terms of preparing for the next step in college sports. Revenue sharing. Everybody saw this coming. Everybody knew this was coming. Anybody, like even an idiot like me, could see that this was coming. I didn't know what form it would take. I didn't know what it would look like. But you can bet your sweet behind that everybody a year ago could see where this was going. Maybe 2 years ago. I think a lot of people, fans, knew that this is going to end up with paying the players. It was the most obvious thing in the universe. You might not have known what, I didn't know what it was going to look like. You didn't know what it was going to look like. But we are also not highly paid athletic administrators at the college level who should have people around us who are going to guide us to figure out what this is going to look like. You could have spent the last 18 months pretending like you would not eventually end up paying the players. But if you did, then all the other schools who looked at it and said, you know what, we're going to end up paying the players. We better have a plan for this. We better start figuring out how we're going to do this. We better dive headlong into this thing so that when that time comes, we are prepared for it. Pitt didn't do that. Multiple people. I've talked to multiple sources. I feel relatively comfortable in saying this. Pitt did not do that. And Pitt is behind. And they will be behind. Now, I think they've made efforts to catch up. I think they've made efforts to catch up on NIL. I think they've made efforts to catch up on planning for revenue sharing. But it's not enough. Entering this next stage of college athletics, and it's happening fast. It's changing fast. Okay? I just had this conversation on the message boards yesterday. I generally am the type that when people start claiming about this is the major changing point in college athletics, it's this major thing or anything, not even just college athletics, but a major change is coming. It's all going to be different. It's never going to look the same. Everything is changing. Everything we've known is going away. All this stuff. I push back again. I'm skeptical of that. Because that major, giant, seismic, abrupt change never really seems to come. If you take point A and point B and they're 40 years apart, then yes, it looks like a major seismic change. But it took 40 years for that change, or 30 years, or 20 years, or 10 years. What we are in right now, and what we are on the brink of, is seismic, abrupt change in college sports. You know it and I know it. And things that we would not have thought possible 10 years ago, paying the players, realignment, sports getting cut, these things are all very real. And I'm not saying that like we didn't think realignment was possible 10 years ago, but this almost sort of seeming inevitability that there's going to be just 2 power conferences and everybody else is just going to be picking up whatever scraps they can get. Like, this sport has already undergone a major seismic change, and it is not done. These tectonic plates are not done moving, but they're going at 100 miles an hour. And in 5 years, this sport, college football, college athletics as a whole, will look very, very different from what it looks like right now, let alone 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. This is happening at an abrupt rate, and it is seismic, and it is a major change. And right now, if you're any school, if you are Alabama, if you are Ohio State, if you are Texas, you need strong, visionary, forward-thinking leadership. And if you are at Pitt, if you are at Georgia Tech, if you are at Minnesota, if you are at Boston College, if you are at West Virginia, if you are at Washington State, if you are at Arizona State, if you are at that vast majority we always talk about, that vast majority of schools that really makes up the bulk of FBS, let's just say, that need for strength, vision, and the ability to have forward-thinking views, forward-thinking approach is twice as important, 4 times as important, 10 times as important as it is at some of those other schools. And those other schools are already acting like it's 10 times as important for them. You need to have that. So we come back to this question of why might Joan Gable not be flipping over tables to try to get a contract extension signed with Heather Lyke. Why might there be this impasse between the two parties? Maybe, and I can't say that this now at this point. This is me just speculating. Okay, most of what I've said up until this point over the last 28 minutes or so has been pretty well sourced. This is me just speculating. Maybe she doesn't see the vision. Maybe she looks at the management of the athletic department over the last 7 years, looks at sort of the general direction of things in terms of financial management, personnel management, and where things seem to be heading, and says, I'm not sure I see the vision that I want to see, the strength that I want to see in leadership to guide this athletic department and by extension this university into the next era of college sports. And again, that's me speculating. But I think when you consider all of this, and I think we probably could talk a lot longer about some of these things. And like I say, we got a long post on the message boards on Panther-Lair.com about some, additional issues, finances and management and things like that. But I think maybe that's where the new chancellor is coming from. That she came in a year ago, sat back and watched for a year and said, I don't know. Why didn't Pitt do some of these things? Why isn't Pitt better prepared for some of these things? Why isn't Pitt moving forward? So, just a few thoughts. I like I say, I feel like there are 10 other things I would talk about here. There are 10 other things I would say. And 10 other things that certainly we have discussed on the message boards. We've already released. This is like our longest Morning Pitt of the week. So there you go. You got a half hour of pontificating and general thoughts on the state of Pitt athletics. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. Get in the comments on here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Post on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com or on Twitter at Panther-Lair. I'd like to hear from you and hear what you think. I suspect the next 48 hours will be really interesting. And then, thank God, we have football. So we got that to look forward to. Don't forget, we have the mailbag tomorrow. If you have any questions, go to the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com. Let us hear what you're thinking and what you're talking about, what you want to ask questions about. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you've had a great week so far. It's Thursday, folks. We're almost to the weekend. We're almost to the game day. So looking forward to that for sure. Have a great Thursday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow with the Morning Pitt mailbag right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.